Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Everag Global Insights. And Steve, we're here with a bit of an update on this week's Pulse event, some interesting trade stats that we're going to have a look at, as well as chart of the week. So let's kick off with this week's Pulse. And it was a positive event this week. The question's going to be asked, are we off the floor? The average skim milk powder medium heat price increased by $65 a tonne compared to the last auction. And April 2024 futures also moved higher with this result. And skim milk powder is still going sideways in the EU, so some interesting dynamics there. So for whole milk powder, the Pulse result was $20 a tonne higher. April 2024 futures were $65 a tonne higher as a result. So some interesting results there, Steve. But as always, it always depends on who turns up at the auction on the day, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Look, encouraging that we may be off the floor, given the whole milk powder is more convincing, but in the background, not seeing big reasons why that would be. Trade data from the US showed a year-on-year rise in skim milk powder, but that's a bit deceptive. It's in a long time since we've seen a rise in terms of volumes. But, looking into this, Mexico continued to drift. Mexico's half the exports for the US in the past year. Southeast Asia, a bit under a third. So trends in those two are the important things to watch. Firstly, Mexico is waning and has been down for several months. In the last 6 months, down 11%. It's slowing down. But we've seen a kick up in Southeast Asian trade. Probably what we've seen elsewhere, there's been a revival in trade volumes at low prices, and there's certainly the case here, big year-on-year increase in the 1 month. Let's see if that stays there. That's, maybe the start of something.
Cheese exports were also up 32% year-on-year in the latest month of data. Mexico is now 35% of cheese exports for the US, and that's increased from 28% a year ago, Steve. So Mexico and its continued demand is all important, particularly with that new capacity coming on later this year, Steve.
Yeah, but does it matter? The export data gives an encouraging sign that there's been a lift in activity, but when you look across here, we've just compared here what's happened in the last 6 months of data, and bearing in mind domestic data trails this a bit, so it's not as up to date. But production, domestic and exports cancelling each other out in terms of tonnage, but we're still producing more cheese.
The net impact is actually not great, is it? Even though exports are up, domestic sales matter so much more in this instance.
Look, American cheese within the cheese category is a better story, but in total cheese terms, it's still overproduction.
Mm-hmm. And now we're turning to Australia, and we've got some export data from Australia. Sometimes we feel we don't matter, but we thought we'd put this up. So the current season, which is on the left-hand side there in the dark blue, a little bit up on last year, just given we do have a bit more milk production in Australia this year. And that's mostly gone into cheese, but also a bit more skim and whole milk powder as well, Steve. Fat's pretty flat. And just on the import side, which is also very interesting in Australia, we are an exporting nation, but we're also increasingly an important importer for cheese. Imports were up 15% in February 2024. They haven't been up this year, just given the additional milk within Australia that's been converted mostly into cheese. So the last 6 months, we've actually seen imports down 6%. But we're still seeing a big drift in terms of New Zealand's share, Steve. And that really reflects more retail, private label product that's been won by New Zealand suppliers and some processed cheese into this market. So I think it's 48% up for New Zealand this past year, Steve, which is significant, isn't it?
Taking most of it off the US. US exports to this market are down 20%. So it's there's been growth in some of that commodity value coming in.
Sure.
I think we saw the exports up, commodity imports lately up a little bit, but that's it's coming off with more milk, as you said.
Interesting.
Across to butter.
Yeah.
That's dropped 27% in the last 6 months. We had a big month in February. Whether that continues, fats are lower again, more milk and cream supplies. Even though cheese has soaked up a bit of fat, there's still plenty of cream around by all reports, but we don't expect that will increase much. I think we'd call our local market a bit sloppy right now in terms of butterfat.
What a lovely word. Looking at that butterfat import data, Steve, it really got us thinking about the wider butterfat trade. And what we've seen is really not a lot of growth. Looking at this annualised data for total global trade, there really is a big chunk of that is destined for developed markets, which is the most important part for New Zealand in particular. That orange part into other markets is a lot around US trade and European trade, isn't it, Steve?
Mm.
But we're just seeing overall, it's not really moving up very much at all. We saw some improved demand from China in 2021-22 when they were loading up a little bit and facing some higher veg oil prices. So it really does beg the question, Steve, if trade's so flat, why are we seeing this rally in butterfat prices?
So let's look at that history. If we go back to 2015, which is a long time and the world's changed a lot, but we're just looking here, the question we're asking, we've seen an AMF rally for 15 events, risen, prices risen 55%, close to $2,500. So can it be sustained? You can see that on the very right. It's not out of the ordinary, though, when you look at the history of AMF. So, going back, how long does a rally like this last? Do prices stay elevated for long? What's caused it? So we've gone back and just highlighted here a few of those big events in rallies, because the recent rally is quite a short one. We should all remember.
In context, yeah.
In context. So back in 2017-18, we had the intervention period going on there. So while they had a lot of skim milk powder stock, they were avoiding making additional skim just to add to the problem. Therefore, butterfat slowed and we saw a big spike in prices. New Zealand followed that up. That's a fairly large, long period of elevated prices above where we are now. And we had that little period in 2019. What happened there, Joe, do you think?
Just looking at that little rally in that green AMF line, New Zealand had dried out at that time. And so there were some concerns about availability of AMF out of New Zealand. And so you can see that spike in that green line. And then again, following butter down. And then this current rally, Steve.
And the war has a bit to do with that.
Yes.
Prior to the war, a bit of a rally in sunflower, which was probably a weather issue. There's certainly a shortage. 21, again, China probably loading up caused some of that. But the war drastically cut the sunflower oil supplies into Europe. European prices rallied, and New Zealand were able to follow that up because there's not many suppliers of butterfat to the world market, and gives New Zealand a bit of shade when the European prices rise so strongly. And then came off. And then we got this recent rally. Sure, European supplies tightened late last year. Prices just relaxing and going sideways a bit right now. But the question is, how durable is AMF with that rising EU milk outlook, with higher product in spring?
Yeah.
So just how long we'll see this AMF price remain elevated with veg oil prices low and pretty, I'd say, price-sensitive markets in the developing world.
Yeah, there's nothing going on in that wider oil complex that would suggest continuation of it.
Chart of the week, Joe, what have you got for us?
Well, this week we're looking at some of the data out of the US for February manufacturing production. And we've got a little bit of an increase in raw milk availability there. But again, we're seeing that mostly going into cheese, particularly non-cheddar, mozzarella cheeses. And again, that avoidance of skim milk powder and non-fat dry milk. So pretty much continuing on that trend, Steve, of prioritising cheese. And we're also seeing a bit of an increase in butter production as well. So interesting.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks all for watching. We'll be back again next week.